Hey everyone, welcome to Coffee with Joe for Thursday, July 15th, 2010. Joe, how you
Salute.
doing?
Hey, Pete. Very good, thank you. Very good.
Joe, back to the program for monetary reform, this 1939 document that we've been talking about for the last few weeks. And our friend Zarathustra is now reading the entire program for monetary reform on his site. We'd like to spend a little time going through it with a finer comb than we have before. We've mostly just been talking about its existence and getting it out there to people. So today, what I'd like to talk about is they start out. I think there's something like 19 points in the program for monetary reform. The first point is about the gold standard, Joe. They spend quite a bit of time talking about uh, how the gold standard would be problematic in terms of monetary reform, and then they move on to what they call the standard of stable buying power is the standard um, that they're promoting. So I guess what one thing you could say is that a gold standard would not produce stable buying power.
Well, I would certainly say that, Pete. Okay, I would certainly say that. Um, I think in order to have a discussion about why the gold standard's there, and how it might affect anything, is to really to take a look at what they wrote as the whole purpose of them doing the presenting the program, Pete. And it's in the introduction. It says it is intended to eliminate one recognized cause of Great Depressions, the lawless variability in our supply of circulating medium, money. Okay, fluctuations in the amount of money in existence, too much during inflations and too little during depressions. That's the mark, Pete. Honest to God, there's no other mark. Okay, that's what it's all about. Right now, we're going into another recession because of contraction of the money supply, plain and simple. And we have no means still today, Pete. That's the irony here. That's what makes this document so significant, Pete. Is the irony is we have lawful variability in our supply of circulating medium through the fractional reserve debt money system. So so their point is that in order to deal with that variability and to provide stability in place of that variability, they need to discuss the standards by which we're going to try to maintain the amount of currency in existence and the buying power of that money. But they start out in discussing the gold standard. Why? Because of the fact this is 1939, Pete, and in the 34, 35, with FDR's changes, we got off the gold standard. FDR wanted us to have something more stable currency, okay, a more stable currency, the stable buying power standard. But they talk a lot, Pete, about the fact that gold was trying to serve two masters in terms of monetary policy.
What are the two masters, Joe?
Well, the two masters would be one, the standard by which international business, corporate commerce is settled, okay, and that is to say you and I can't just exchange our dollars for guilders because we need to have some kind of a thing that settles what those things are worth, okay? And at the time we set gold as yours is worth this much gold, mine's worth this much gold, and that's how we settled. But at the same time, gold it's a commodity.
There were boatloads of gold going back and forth.
Exactly. See, it's a commodity, and because it's a commodity, it's subject to speculation by commodities manipulators, Pete. Okay. The other master is to set the value internally of the buying power of the dollar, because one of the things that we try to do is equate labor and energy to money, and we want to be able to preserve that, Pete. That to say that your labor today is going to be worth at least the same as it will be next year or 5 years from now. I don't mean the same, but what I mean is you don't want to lose it, Pete. You don't want to lose the value of your labor to international finance. And that's basically what was happening and what has been happening, and that's what's happening today, Pete. Okay? That's what's happening today because we've not solved the problem of the variability in our supply of circulating medium as we contract the money supply today. So their whole point of the discussion, Pete, to start the discussion was to say that we needed to do something about it. And in order to do that, we needed to address the differences between those two masters and to settle internally, because this is a document for our monetary policy, Pete. Okay? We needed to settle that in favor of the country. We needed to settle that in favor of the people. And in order to do that, we needed to come up with a new standard of what money is worth, not having anything really to do with gold per se, okay, or any commodity per se. And in order to do that, we had to manage the money supply on some other basis. So we're going to do away with the gold standard of exchange. We're going to replace it with some other standard of exchange. And that's basically the discussion of gold here. You know, when you read the whole thing, it's great. It's got a lot of history, but basically it's saying that's done. You know, we can't do that. We can't have that. They lay out all the reasons why we can't have it, and all the Austrians and the gold buggers in the world should take a look at it. And by the way, Pete, whenever I talk down about gold, I don't talk down about gold as a store of value. I don't talk about down about gold about, you know, its value in commerce or anything. No, it's a matter of having a currency based on gold. That's the problem with it, okay?
People feel like a gold standard is less likely to be abused, right?
Yeah, incorrectly so. You know, I mean, the proof is the proof is completely the opposite, Pete. Okay, because when we talk about those values, there's inflation and deflation, and inflation and deflation is invariably marked by increases and decreases in the money supply. It's by definition so, Pete. Okay, because relatively speaking, today to next year to the year after that, you have population, and you have production capabilities, you have natural resources, you have the things that make up the real economy, and then you have the money, supposedly providing the means of exchange to do that. Well, the population doesn't change that much from year to year, if you know what I mean. The productivity, you know, everything is basically increasing, you know, and yet when we have these variations in the quantity of money, Pete, we end up with the kind of situations that we have today. So instead of having workers working and production producing, what we have is money drying up. You know, we have money, money reducing. And what it's really going to, Pete, I mean, you know, we don't want to get too far afield. It's going to pay the debts of the debt money system. That's what it's going for. But it's able to do that because, and it's able to do that and reduce because we do not have a standard by which we will manage the monetary system and the money supply. That's why we're in the situation that we're in today. It's totally related, Pete, to the same things going on back then.
So how would the program for monetary reform change that, Joe?
Well, the program for monetary reform says we want to have a standard of stable buying power. Okay, the standard of stable buying power. The definition of that is without inflation or deflation, Pete. So then what happens is it comes a matter of how do we set up a system to maintain the standard of stable buying power. It's really simple. That is to say, the concept. Once you really understand the concept of replacing gold with the standard of stable buying power, you're on your way, Pete. You really are underway to say, okay, if it's going to be stable buying power, how are we going to do stable buying power? And this program lays out the options, at least for the ones that we could choose from among them, Pete. Okay, it makes, you know, some soft recommendations, but it clearly shows that by having the government in control of determining the amount of money in existence on the basis of something that's in law, okay, that we could have, a standard of stable buying power. Pete.
So the various different soft recommendations, I mean, one of them is based on a per capita increase?
The per capita standard, okay, it basically says that at the point that you establish that there's a certain amount of money per capita, okay, that on that basis, as the population increases, money can increase by the same amount, and what you would have is the same standard. But the per capita would be the metric, and the other metric is the standard of living, Pete. They use the I think they call it the constant standard of living metric. In which case you're saying that you have a certain amount. Basically, I don't want to use GDP, but that's what they use. You know, say Well, the GDP per capita is X. If the GDP is going to go up by Y, then we increase the money supply by Y in order to provide the means of exchange without inflation or deflation for that to happen. Now, of course, that GDP metric is a has to go out the window. It's really got to be a series of other metrics on. I think they call it the shopping basket, of goods. And there were countries that did that immediately, Pete, when they got off the gold standard. The Scandinavian countries, notably, immediately they got into a stable. The stable buying power became their market basket standard, Pete.